Pretty good. Now, if this was real life, my wrists would be absolutely screaming because this is the monstrous Smith & Wesson 500, a handgun that exists only to be absurd, and that is not an exaggeration. This thing really doesn't have a myriad of practical uses because it is so gigantic, but it does have that wow factor, and Smith & Wesson designed this cartridge, the Smith & Wesson 500 Magnum, specifically to be absurd. And the gun that goes with it, the Smith & Wesson 500, is equally as absurd and up for the task. And to put all of that absurdity into perspective, I have arranged a few handguns here so we can talk about the difference in power between all these. So first up here is a Walther P22. This fires the very popular 22 long rifle, and it is pretty small, but it is a very popular round because it is low power and it is very cheap. The guns that fire it are very cheap, so overall cost to use and maintain is very low. And it's actually a cartridge and a gun that I would recommend to a lot of new shooters because I don't believe it's good for someone to step up to the line and fire something like a Smith & Wesson 500 for the first time because you really want to ease someone into it. And something like this, which I would say is just kind of like a step up from a BB gun, is a really good way to get into things. It will help you build up your fundamentals and get used to firing a handgun without something loud, powerful, and scary in front of you. So the downside of that is that this is not very powerful. This 22 long rifle bullet is only firing with about 200 joules of energy, and I know that number might not mean a lot to you, but it will soon come into focus because next up we have the Glock 17, which fires the 9mm round. This is also extremely popular, and this is, I think, to me, my favorite round to fire just on range days for just shooting paper or steel targets because it is relatively inexpensive. It's powerful enough that you feel like you got something in your hand that can do some damage, but not so expensive that it'll break the bank. So this guy is a little bit more powerful with 500 joules of energy. So we're getting into the range of cool stuff because next up we have the 44 Magnum revolver, a pretty classic round that you guys have probably heard of. Looks like I'm missing some of my targets. Whoops. And this guy really ramps up in energy. This is 1500 joules. So kind of 3 times as much as that Glock. And you can really feel it if you shoot something like this. But then again, this revolver design doesn't lend itself well to superior recoil control because of that super high bore axis and the occasionally awkward grip. So this guy, I'm sure you guys are familiar with, the Desert Eagle. It has gone through a lot of iterations and has ended up to a point where it's a little too tactical. It's got a lot of these rails. The grip is a little strange, and the porting on the barrel is a little too much for my tastes. I like the older chrome versions. I think they're pretty cool. But this is what they decided to go with, and I guess it sells, otherwise they wouldn't keep using it. Pretty good. This thing's powerful enough. It's blown some of the top targets back. And this is doing a bit more damage than the 44 Magnum even, with 2,000 joules of energy. And so you can imagine the 44 Magnum plus a Glock, and you're getting into the 50 AE territory. That cartridge, the 50 Action Express. Can't find any of my empties. Must have flown somewhere. So I'll just grab one from here. Gotta go all the way to the 5s. 50 Action Express. So we got one of those there to talk about in a second because we're stepping up to the Smith & Wesson 500. And how much energy do you think this fires with? So we had 200, 500, 1500, and then 2000 joules of energy for these guys. What do you think? An extra 500 joules? Maybe an extra 750 from the 50 caliber? 50 Action Express, I guess, because these are both 50 caliber. I like to fire these in single action by pulling the the hammer back. And I should just, as a disclaimer, mention that I have not fired a Smith & Wesson 500 in real life. I would love to. The most powerful handgun I've fired is a 454 Casull. A lot of 44 Magnums and 357 Magnums. But I really haven't gotten to this level. And it is an intimidating level. If I had the chance, I would fire it. But what was your guess? So 2,000 for the 50 Desert Eagle. This guy is actually 4,000, twice as powerful, kind of, asterisks, because all of these, there are a lot of factors that go into this, but in terms of just raw energy, on average, with a lot of the popular cartridges, we're talking about 4,000 joules of energy out of the Smith & Wesson 500. So absolutely ridiculous and absurd. Let's load up 5 more and show those watermelons over there just how absurd this revolver is. Let's get a little bit closer. These are expensive bullets, so I don't want to miss, even though they are virtual. Ooh, that was good enough. It blew the box off too. So you can fire this in double action, like so. There's a little bit of a strangeness because it's a 2-stage trigger on the Vive, which sometimes catches me off guard. But one of the reasons I don't like to fire revolvers in double action like that is because that firing, that point where it actually will drop the hammer, kind of creeps up on you because it isn't 2-stage in real life. It is just smooth and linear, and then it goes whenever you get to the end of the travel. And that sneaks up on you, and if you're firing something really powerful like this, you can flinch and jerk, and it's overall stressful. So if you set the hammer beforehand and just fire in single action, it's a very light, crisp trigger pull. You can anticipate it, and I mean, you don't recommend that flinch, that attempt to compensate for recoil by pushing forward as you're firing, but it's something that you have to get used to. You have to fire powerful handguns and basically just erase that from your technique. So this thing's absolutely incredible. Let's unload it and take out some of those bottles over there. I think the watermelons were talking to the bottles, so they should be scared. We'll see if we can hit them from here. Get a little bit closer to the sight so you can see. Absolutely dusted it. Woo! Oh! I know my shooting stance is pretty terrible. That's just because it's VR, obviously, but I think I was still holding myself back. Woo! Pretty good, pretty good. So now I'm going to try and take out one of these plates here. Let's load this up. I'm going to try one of those fancy moves as you see with some professional sporting clay shooters. They'll do those speed things where they throw them up in the air. And the odd thing about this, I can't pick it up with my controller, so I have to use something I can pick up to get this up in the air. Use my Smith & Wesson 500 as a utensil here. Get into some open space. Whoops. Didn't realize it wouldn't come with us. Okay. There we go. Whew. Okay. Set the hammer. Let's see if we can get this in the air. That's so great. It exploded like unbelievably, like some kind of little bomb went off and then just sent off all of the shards out into the wasteland. It's pretty good. Let's see if we can get that cup now. I have an idea. Nope, not modeled correctly. Or entirely. Gosh, this is rough. Whew. Okay, nice. Smaller target here. Hope it doesn't slip through my horseshoe. It's so satisfying. Woo! Oh, almost got that. I don't know. What is it called when you get a horseshoe? Just a horseshoe? It's probably got a cool name. So, there we go. I'm going to just fire off the rest of these. And I think that's it. Yep. Interesting note there. You can see how experienced someone is, or at least how much they've erased their flinch by firing something like a revolver or something that doesn't lock back, because they'll be firing. Let me just demonstrate this for you. They'll be firing, like boom, trying to compensate maybe. And then they'll get to a point, and if you see that hammer just drop and they don't move, then they were maybe expecting it to fire, but they were reserved enough or trained enough that they weren't going to flinch. But sometimes that'll happen where they think there'll be a bullet there, and you'll just see someone go, "Whoa." And it's, nothing against them. They're learning. Maybe they just are getting used to the recoil. So, you just try and teach those things in as opposed to mock. But it's something you can work on to be a more accurate shooter, because that flinch will get you off your target. We'll talk about that another time. But now that we've seen the Smith & Wesson 500 in relation to the rest of these handguns, we can talk about it in relation to something a little bit more powerful. This time, an M1 Garand full-power battle rifle firing the 30-06 cartridge, which is somewhat similar to 308, but it's a pretty nasty bullet, pretty powerful. Get that safety off. Ooh, speaking of flinch. Ooh, there we go. And then let's get rid of the rest of these. Bing! Nice. So, this big bad rifle, how do you think it compares to a Smith & Wesson 500? Would you have guessed that they have very similar energy in those rounds? That seems a little bit crazy, doesn't it? But if you look at this and hold it in real life, it might not feel so crazy because this is massive and heavy. But yeah, so there are obviously a lot of different characteristics between that Smith & Wesson 500 Magnum round and the 30-06 round in terms of the bullet weights and velocities. But in terms of just raw energy, they're both just sitting under 4,000 joules for a lot of the common loads. So they're reasonably comparable, which is somewhat absurd. So, what is a powerful rifle? I mean, that's a powerful rifle, don't get me wrong, but what is the, I guess, Smith & Wesson 500 of rifles? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I have just that. The Barrett M107 50 caliber anti-material rifle. Yeah, doesn't get much more absurd than this. So firing the Barrett 50 BMG round. If we can grab a Smith & Wesson 500 Magnum here, you can see that they are somewhat different, but they do fire the same caliber bullet. And that doesn't mean you can modify this to fire in there. There are a lot of different dimensions involved in the chamber and how these things function, but they do have the same diameter bullet, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. That just goes to show you the difference of philosophies between creating a handgun cartridge like a Magnum, just straight casing like this, versus a rifle cartridge which has this smaller diameter neck. So we don't need that. And let's just take a few shots with this guy because we have it out. Honk. Wow, this is magnification. This is like a parody of some Call of Duty game. Oh, I yanked it. Where'd it go? Woo. Oh man, that was crazy. Just exploding there with some fireworks. I don't know if those were tracer rounds or just something crazy. So, this bad boy, which there will be a video on at some point. Rest assured. So, to finish this off, whoa, see you later, Deagle. We are going to head over here to take out some of these bottles. They've seen all of the devastation that's been wrought, and they must be shaken. So I'm just going to go through here and try and clear all those as fast as possible. I don't see anything else. And if you have a clock or timer, start it now. Ooh, my controller's drifting quite a bit because I am standing perpendicular to the VR towers. Oof. Come on. Nice, finished off strong. Victory! Woo! So, the crazy Smith & Wesson 500. If you have the opportunity to purchase one and you want one, I say go for it. It's hilarious. All your friends are going to want to shoot it. But at the same time, I find it hard to recommend because I would equate it to buying something like a very high-strung sports car, some $300,000 Ferrari. It's powerful. It's making a statement. But when push comes to shove, some days you're just going to want to go get groceries, and that Ferrari's not going to be the best gun or the best car for the job, rather. Sometimes you just need that four-door sedan to get things done. And I would say something like a Glock 17 is that four-door sedan. When would you encounter this? I'd say the best way to kind of play around with it is try and find a shooting range that rents a lot of guns out and just have an opportunity to fire maybe one bullet, because this thing is going to really want to break your wrists, no matter how much you try to avoid that. Oof. I have a hard time reading these sights. I don't know if it's reading it so much as just seeing them. Whew. Okay, so thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video on the Smith & Wesson 500. A very cool firearm because of its absurdity. So, again, if you liked the video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like the video, thumbs down. Comments, subscribe if you want to see more. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Wait, where are you guys? You're over here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.